Mr. Beer, before we begin to hear evidence this morning, I have an announcement to make. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my sad duty to announce that Mrs. Gillian Blakely, one of our core participants, passed away last week. Mrs. Blakely had been the sub-postmaster at Ryeby Post Office in Lincolnshire. During her period as a sub-postmaster, data from the Horizon system suggested that there was a substantial shortfall at the branch, and the use of that data in due course led to Mrs. Blakely's husband, David, being prosecuted and Mrs. Blakely ceasing to be the sub-postmaster. Mr. Blakely's conviction was quashed by the Court of Appeal Criminal Division in April 2001. Both Mr. and Mrs. Blakely were claimants in the group litigation. My understanding is that Mrs. Blakely had not received the additional compensation to which she was entitled under the GLO scheme. That must be a matter of great regret for all concerned. On behalf of all the members of the inquiry team and on my own behalf, I extend my deepest sympathies to all Mrs. Blakely's family and friends. I understand, and if any necessary formalities need to be undertaken, this will be done, that Mr. Blakely will represent his wife's interest as a core participant during the remainder of the inquiry. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, Mr. Beer.
May I call Nick Reed?
Yes.
I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
and
nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
If you'd like to sit down.
Good morning, Mr. Reed. As you know, my name is Jason Beer and I ask questions on behalf of the inquiry. Can you give us your full name, please?
Nicholas James Reed.
You've made kindly 4 witness statements to the inquiry. Can we start, please, by going through each of those? The first witness statement is dated the 2nd of September 2024. It's 132 pages long, excluding its appendix. Can we look at that? It's WITN 00760100. It'll come up on the screen for you. So this is your first witness statement, 132 pages. If we go to page 132, please.
132.
Have you managed to track down the hard copy?
I'm just looking for it, actually. Yeah, so bear with me a second.
If your files...
I've got it, yes.
Thank you. Is that your signature in the hard copy?
It is indeed.
And are the contents of that true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are.
Thank you very much. Your second witness statement, dated the 3rd of September, i.e. the next day, WITN 00760200, at 26 pages, excluding the appendix. Again, if you can track that down, please.
I have, yes.
Thank you. Page 26, is that your signature?
It is indeed.
And are the contents of that true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are.
Thank you. Your third witness statement, WITN 00760300, 142 pages, excluding its appendix, dated the 13th of September. I think there are 3 corrections to make to this. If we can go to page 28, please. And look at paragraph 64. In the 3rd line, it says, I was conscious that there was a lot of activity that could be brought together to deal with the actions from the Common Issues Judgment and the Horizon Issues Judgment. This came together under the Improvement Delivery Group set up in February 2021 and which until October 2021 focused on the change delivery and tracking the actions. Should that read October 2022?
Yes, that's correct.
So cross out 2021 and insert 2022.
Correct.
Secondly, page 108. Paragraph 231. Second line. We had incomplete HR records, which, given this was a desktop exercise to review 700 colleagues, should that read 1,700 colleagues?
It should.
So 1,700 rather than 700. And then thirdly, page 140. Paragraph 305, line 4, the working environment being subject to public sector pay, inventive and settlement constraints. Should that read incentive rather than inventive?
That's correct.
Thank you. Can you go to page 142, please, in the hard copy? Is that
Yes.
your signature?
It is indeed.
With those three corrections brought into account, is the statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
It is.
Thank you very much. They can be, that can be put to one side. Your fourth witness statement, WITN 00760400, that's dated the 24th of September and is 7 pages, excluding its appendix. Can you turn up page 7, please?
Yes.
Is that your signature?
It is indeed.
And are the contents of that true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
Thank you very much. Those witness statements, I think, can all be put to one side now.
Thank you.
In their hard copy. Before addressing your background, I just want to break down the two species of witness statements that we have just looked at, and which overall I think constitute some 307 pages of material, if my maths is right. Is it correct that the first, second and fourth witness statements are corporate witness statements made on behalf of Post Office Limited,
Yes, that's correct.
whereas the third witness statement is a personal witness statement from you?
Absolutely right.
Can you please explain in your own words the difference between them?
Not a great deal, because, to be fair, I think my role as the CEO of the Post Office is all-encompassing from a personal perspective, and such that the deviation of my own reflections reflect exactly what I believe has happened over the last 5 years. So I don't think it differs enormously. There are clearly elements within the questions that you asked me in the third statement that are more personal, but I don't think the deviation from the corporate witness statement to my personal witness statement is particularly different.
And so it isn't the case in relation to the first, second and fourth witness statement that you are saying things that you do not personally agree with, but you are saying them because on behalf of the company, corporately, that is the company's position.
Yes, that's correct.
Was there any difference in the process by which each of them came to be made? I.e. one subject to, for example, board approval or a group of executives' approval, whereas the third witness statement was your words and your words alone?
Yes, I think it would be fair to say that the corporate witness statements involved subject matter experts from within the business supporting and helping me with some of the content. Clearly, from a personal witness perspective, they were my words.
Thank you. In relation to your background, you are currently the Post Office's Group Chief Executive Officer, is that correct?
That is correct.
You joined the Post Office in September 2019.
Yes,
You announced on the 18th of September this year that you will be resigning from your position at the Post Office in March 2025, is that right?
that is correct.
In relation to your previous career before the Post Office, can we look please at your third witness statement at page 3? So WITN 00760300. And page 3. In paragraph 7, you set out chronologically your career for us by setting out the jobs that you had before you joined the Post Office in paragraphs 7A to 7J. Is that right? We just scroll down.
Yes, that's correct.
You tell us later in your witness statement that 2 of those roles amounted to large-scale leadership roles as a CEO of a challenged organisation, and that as a result you had experience on joining the Post Office of crisis management and turnarounds. Is that right?
That's correct.
One of those, I would guess, was the job at the Chief Executive Officer of NISA Retail. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And which was the other one?
And the other one was the CEO of Extra Energy, the GmbH, which is a J.
Could you explain briefly your experience in those two organisations of stabilisation, modernisation and growth in a struggling and challenged or failing business?
Yes, I'll start with the NISA Retail. I was recruited into this role to a very challenged business. It was suffering from breached banking covenants. It had just recorded its first loss as an organisation. It had some serious governance issues associated with shadow directors and issues of board colleagues. And it also overstated its income. So it had 4 pretty fundamental issues at play. And it was in a very and highly competitive market, which was convenience retail. My job was to come in and to stabilize the organization, to get the business growing again, and to try and identify what the long-term future for NISA Retail would be. And that was and ultimately became a sale to the Co-op organization. So it was a fairly classic turnaround of some quite substantive challenges.
And Extra Energy?
And Extra Energy, I was parachuted into Extra Energy to salvage an organisation that was suffering immense stress in the UK. It was a European energy business with a UK arm. This particular challenge was a service challenge and an IT challenge. Ultimately, after 5 months, it became apparent that it wasn't salvageable, and I had the difficult challenge of explaining to the owners of the business that, in my opinion, we should put the business into administration, which is what we did, which was extremely challenging for the 500 colleagues who worked in the UK. And obviously my job was to see that process through to its conclusion and to regroup the organisation back to mainland Europe.
Thank you. In your witness statement at paragraphs 10 to 25, you provide details of your role as the Chief Executive of the Post Office, the situation when you joined the Post Office, and the process which led to your appointment. If we can just look at a few paragraphs within that section, starting with paragraph 12 on page 6. You say before and during this interview process, this is the interview process for the role of CEO at Post Office, I familiarised myself with Post Office and was therefore aware that the Post Office was facing litigation from postmasters connected with allegations of historic bugs in the IT system and the requirement for postmasters to repay shortfall. I did not at that stage have a detailed understanding of what the litigation involved, nor the postmasters' allegations, and had not, before being appointed, read the common issues judgment as opposed to summaries. The job specification did not mention the litigation, and as far as I recall, it was not mentioned during the interview process. The job specification did not state the Post Office needed to oversee a large scale and complex IT transformation project, i.e. replacing Horizon. Again, as far as I was aware, this was also not mentioned to me during the interview process. I had no indication that a significant part of my role would be a profound cultural change of the scale needed, dealing with the litigation or its implications, or in delivering a large-scale IT transformation. These issues were never presented to me as priorities during the interview process. Just stopping there, can we look, please, at the job specification, poll 00448890. This is, I think, the job specification that you're referring to. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
We can see it's a person specification for the CEO of Post Office Limited. And then if we go over the page, it's a 7-page document. It sets out the history of the Post Office on this page, its reach within the United Kingdom. In the paragraph at the bottom of the page there, its turnover. It sets out its products in 4 strategic business areas, and then over the page. It says, so we can just go over the page. Thank you. Post Office, underneath the bullet points, has made strong progress over the last 5 years in laying the foundations for longer-term success, modernising 7,000 branches, 200,000 extra hours of opening, continual programme of investing in and modernising its branch network. 3 lines from the bottom of that paragraph, legacy systems and IT are being addressed and upgraded now that the separation from RMG is complete. This will deliver around 15% reduction in annualised operating costs by March 2018. That was obviously over a year before this, so that's out-of-date information that's been cut into this document, presumably. Yes. If we carry on looking down that page, we'll see at the bottom the strategic priorities. With a stable network and ongoing investment to modernise the network, improve convenience and service for the customer, the Post Office has identified the following 5 strategic priorities, and they're set out over the page. It sets out on this page, page 3, the corporate history of the Post Office, the scrolling down the executive team, the board, the role that the person to take the role of chief executive was to perform over the page, scrolling down the candidate profile, and then over the page, scrolling down, that's the end of the substance of the document, and the rest of the 2-page document contains biographies of members of the board. And so it's right, isn't it, that that does not mention Horizon from start to finish?
That's correct.
It doesn't mention from start to finish the move to NBIT, does it?
No, it doesn't.
A very large and exceptionally complicated IT transformation project.
That's correct.
It does not mention the litigation.
No, it doesn't.
Even though at this time, this would have been summer 2019,
yes,
the recruitment process was taking place. The common issues judgment had been handed down already.
Yes, it had.
Earlier that year.
Absolutely.
And that was rather a fundamental judgment for the Post Office.
I agree.
The Horizon issues trial was just around the corner, was about to start.
Yes.
Also, a rather fundamental trial and ultimately judgment for the Post Office. And so looking at it, the job specification does not properly address or describe the role that you were in fact needed to perform, does it?
No, it doesn't.
If we go back to your witness statement, please, third witness statement at page 7. And paragraph 13, at the last 3 lines, you say, "It's now clear to me that I did not have a proper appreciation at this time of the scope or magnitude of the injustice that postmasters faced." And then at paragraph 16, scrolling down, you say, "My understanding was that I was joining a business that was challenged. Its core product areas, cash and mails, were sunset products, experiencing year-on-year declines in volume and revenue. There was a lack of operational rigor. Overheads were too high. Cost reduction needed to be driven harder." Reading on, there was I did understand to some degree that the relationship with postmasters was strained. The litigation required resolution, and a new partnership with postmasters needed to be established. This felt like a turnaround situation, and you felt you had the relevant experience to lead it. And if we go forwards, please, to page 11 and paragraph 22. You say, "In the first couple of weeks of being CEO, I only had limited contact with the Post Office legal team about the GLO. I did have contact with colleagues who were dealing with the operational changes that needed to be put in place from the Common Issues judgment." Paragraph 23 on page 12. You say you were keen to develop a purpose and vision for the Post Office. From the start, was convinced that the postmasters had to be the central focus for that purpose. And then about 8 lines in, you say the findings from the litigation confirmed this was the right decision. You can't recall exactly when you found out the Post Office privately prosecuted postmasters and had stopped doing so, although you know from having read the Common Issues judgment that was mentioned there. Private prosecutions were presented to me as an historic issue that had ceased before 2015. I didn't need to dig into the details of what had happened at Post Office in the past, as this conduct had ended. Looking at all of that together then, my questions. Had you in fact known what was involved in the role, i.e. the things that you were not told, would you have applied for and accepted the role?
I think I was very well placed to tackle the issues that the job description described.
I'm focusing on the things that weren't in the job description.
Yes, yeah. I was going to come on to that. I think there's no question that I didn't have experience of managing a litigation. I didn't have experience of running a compensation scheme, or indeed of managing a public inquiry. And so the scale of those activities are quite profound and have been quite profound on my role for the last 5 years. Clearly, there won't be many individuals who would have that mix of skills to run a retailer and to continue to maintain an organisation such as the Post Office serving customers, as well as running a public inquiry and a compensation scheme. Would I have accepted the role? I still believe that I had the necessary skills to do it. It's just that coming into the job, it was described in a very different way from what I obviously found in those first few months.
Have you thought why that was?
Yes, I have.
Why it was that the true position was not revealed to you either before appointment or upon appointment?
I think I have thought about it, and I've thought about it quite a lot. I think there was an underestimation of the impact of the common issues judgment on the business. I characterise it in my witness statement in two ways. First and foremost, there was a population who simply didn't believe that they would lose the litigation, and as a consequence, there were not contingencies or plans in place for that eventuality, and so a degree of denial, I would argue. And for the majority...
They'd already lost the common issues judgment by the time you joined. That was sort of 6 months
they had, but
old in the tooth.
They had, but there was a degree of denial, I think, is the point I was trying to make, in the sense that I don't think people had come to terms with having lost the common issues judgment, or indeed what the implications of losing it were. And I think for the vast majority of the organisation, they believed they'd been doing a good job, what they'd been asked to do, and were getting on with it. So there were two very distinct camps within the organisation. I think the majority of the organisation was just getting on with what they thought their job was. And I think the senior leadership were trying to come to terms with the fact that they had not anticipated losing the litigation. And so therefore they were part in denial and part in paralysis.
Who briefed you when you were appointed CEO?
Who briefed me within the organisation?
Yes.
As I say in my witness statement, I spent time obviously with the chair, with Tim Parker, talking about the priorities. I met with all of the group executive before I joined, with the exception of one who was away on holiday. I met with UKGI and with DBT officials before I started. So this was throughout August 2019. So I had a relatively broad understanding coming in on day one. Amongst those briefings, I don't, and I think as I say in my statement, I don't think the scale or enormity of the scandal was brought to life for me, because I don't think there was a realization or recognition at that stage within the business of what needed to be done, or indeed what was likely to happen.
Were you provided in the course of those briefings with a clear analysis of the extent of the Post Office's failings in relation to past enforcement action taken against postmasters?
I'll answer that in two ways. I think work had started to be done to understand the implications of the common issues judgment, and that was work that was being led ostensibly by the legal function, but also by the operations and retail teams. In terms of broader prosecutorial implications, that wasn't something that was necessarily explained in great detail to me when I joined in September 2019.
Were you provided with a clear analysis of the findings of Mr. Justice Fraser in the common issues judgment?
Yes, I was. That piece of work had been done, and I had a breakdown of and summary of the findings and the implications that we were, or what we were going to do as a consequence.
So you were provided with an assessment of the work that was required to be done in order to react to the common issues judgment and move forwards?
Work had started on the conformance plan. I think in one of my exhibits I provide detail of what that work is, and work was beginning to be discussed at the group executive around what the implications and more broadly looked like.
As part of the briefings, was the issue of the conduct, competence and ethics of those within the Post Office that had conducted investigations and prosecutions against postmasters discussed?
No, it wasn't. The focus of the briefings that I received were around conformance with the Common Issues Judgment. What were we going to do in terms of regaining trust, and also the sort of specific themes that Fraser J had identified from a process and procedural and policy perspective.
Did you receive any briefings in relation to the standard of conduct expected of either civil investigators or criminal investigators within the Post Office?
No, I didn't.
And therefore, I think it follows no assessment of whether currently, upon joining, the Post Office's investigators met those standards, either now or in the past.
I think, as I said in my witness statement, the way that it was articulated to me in September 2019 was very much prosecutorial activity had ceased in 2015. Indeed, it hadn't been initiated since 2013. Nothing like this is happening or could happen. We need to look forward. That would be my summary of how it was positioned.
But no analysis of the past in terms of investigation and prosecutorial decision-making?
No.
You said that you had only limited contact with the Post Office legal team about the GLO. Given the importance or significance of the GLO, why did you only have limited contact with the legal team?
I think it goes back to what I described at the start when I came into role, which was that the litigation and Common Issues Judgment wasn't part of the initial briefings that I'd had in terms of called out as something very specific. Those early weeks were about trying to get to know and understand the business more broadly. And so there were a multitude of different priorities that were required in those first 4 to 6 weeks. And I think I identify them in one of the exhibits that I provide, which breaks down pretty precisely what occurred in those 4 to 6 weeks in terms of the breadth of stakeholders and business understanding that was required. But it was during that period that it became apparent that we could and we should be looking to settle with the GLO, and it was in October that those conversations started to occur.
Who was it who presented private prosecutions to you as an historic issue?
The legal function and the General Counsel in particular.
So if you can name...
Yes, at that stage it was Ben Fote was the General Counsel. He was leading on the work that we were doing in that space.
Can you give us a flavour? You tell us in your witness statement that you were told that I did not need to dig into the details of what had happened at the Post Office in the past. Can you give us some flavour of what Mr. Fote was saying?
Yes, the reassurance that Mr. Fote was trying to provide was that this was historic action and activity, as I say, that had ceased in 2015, had not been initiated until 2013. We were now in 2019, and this is activity that had ceased within the business.
And was it Mr. Fote who told you that you did not need to dig into the past?
Yes, that's correct.
And did you accept what he said?
Yes, I had no reason to believe at that stage that we should be going back and looking pre-2015 and 2013. I think we were very, very focused on making sure we made the right changes to address the issues that emerged from the CIJ, as opposed to historically re-examining elements of prosecutorial activity.
Thank you. If we can move forward to pages 13 and 14 of your witness statement, please.
I think I've just done what Karen did yesterday. I have a feeling. I'm not quite sure what that
So yesterday we needed to call on the assistance of
We'll
a
just
IT
pause.
man,
Could
and we
we-
just all sat here quietly. So,
Yes.
so
Is that
let's
right
do
that
that.
we
Yeah,
sit
of
here
course.
quietly?
Yeah.
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 We're back.
Is the screen back on?
We're back.
Yes.
In 2019, for certain.
Screen work.
Yes, it is. Thank you. Yeah.
Right, let's resume then.
Yes. I've been asked to ask you if you can move forwards a little bit and
Sure.
just keep your voice up so that the microphones catch you. Some people are finding it slightly difficult here.
Yep, of course.
Thank you.
Is that better? Is that
Thank you.
okay?
We were looking at pages 13 and 14, and if we just scroll down to paragraph 28, please. You describe under this cross-heading your first 6 months as CEO. And if we just go over the page, please. You describe in this section, paragraphs 28 to 31, the provision of the Horizon Issues Judgment under embargo at the end of November 2019, and it's handing down in mid-December 2019. And you tell us that you do not recall there being serious concerns amongst Post Office's senior leadership when this happened.
That's correct.
And does that mean in the board or in the executive or both?
It means both. And I think the statement I made there, no urgent calls or panic discussions, is exactly what I meant.
Instead, the focus was on trading profits, reducing the government subsidy, and investment in the Post Office.
That's correct.
Looking back, would you agree that this description is of a leadership team in 2019 that was living in something of a dream world, given the content of the Horizon Issues Judgment?
I think it'd be impossible not to conclude that.
You describe the leadership team having pride in their work and their organisation, benign, consultative and friendly communications amongst themselves, but essentially oblivious to the harm that their predecessors, and in some cases they, had inflicted.
Yes, that's the point I was trying to make.
And there wasn't really any appreciation, would this be right, of the seismic nature of both the Common Issues Judgment and the Horizon Issues Judgment taken together?
Agreed.
Instead, the concerns were essentially those that had occupied the Post Office for the past 20 years, namely, how do we achieve financial stability?
Yes, I'm not sure for the past 20 years, but there was certainly a focus following network transformation and the desire to reduce the government subsidy to drive trading profit and to reduce cost. And that was very much the focus of the organisation.
Why was it, in your assessment, that the senior leadership, including you, did not understand the true implications of the Common Issues Judgment and the Horizon Issues Judgment taken together?
I think we became it became more apparent, and we became more aware as the negotiation with the GLO took place through November and December. I think that was the trigger for me personally, given that I'd spent a number of days working with Alan Bates and with others on trying to get to a settlement. So I think it became, as November rolled into December, something that the organisation was getting to grips with. But I think it would also be fair to say that prior to that, the business was very definitely focused on the objectives that were put in front of it by the shareholder, which was very much about reducing subsidy, about driving profit, and reducing the overall necessity for the government to invest in Post Office.
Were you amongst those that did not personally understand the seriousness of the judgments taken together and their implications, including for criminal convictions?
I think I was certainly in those first 3 months faced with a number of issues, certainly trying to get to grips with a new organisation as a CEO and determining what was important, what wasn't important, and what were priorities and what weren't. I think, secondly, the negotiation and the settlement was a huge opportunity for me to get to grips with the implications of the HIJ and the CIJ. But that was done, that was work that I did with the General Counsel as opposed to the broader Group Executive and the board. So I think there was more of a realization, I think, from my perspective, simply because I was in the room and part of that team. And clearly, therefore, that wasn't as widely felt across the organisation. It was from, as I say, from December onwards that we became much more aware of what the implications were.
If we move forwards in your witness statement to page 80, please. You say one line from the top in paragraph 144, I did not spend much time digging into the technical details of the Horizon Issues judgment, as I was more focused on the future to achieve cultural change and drive modernisation and commercial improvement. Was that a common approach amongst the General Executive and the board at that time? Focus on the future rather than the impact of the Horizon Issues judgment on the past?
Yes, I think focusing on today's Post Office for tomorrow was very much the objective of both the board and the Group Executive back in 2019.
Was, that can come down, thank you, was that what I've described as a dream world reflected in your meeting with Tim Parker that you had in early September 2019?
Yes, I think the first meeting I had with Tim was to try and establish, as CEO to chair, what the underlying priorities he had for me. And I think as I exhibited in my statement, the majority of that conversation was centred around the priorities that I described a little earlier. So I think that was fairly widely felt across the board and obviously with Tim.
I think you made some notes of that meeting. It was on the 4th of September 2019 on your mobile telephone after the meeting, is that right?
That's correct.
Essentially as an aide memoir as
Yes.
to what had happened. And then more recently, you cut those telephone notes into an email which you sent to your solicitor, which has been disclosed to us.
That's correct.
Can we look at those, please? Poll 0044 8897. We can ignore the stuff at the top because that's the sending on to your solicitor, which explains how it got to us. And then we can see this is an email sent to yourself in August this year. But as you said, this is essentially you cutting from your mobile telephone into an email the content of the near contemporaneous notes you made back on the 4th of September 2019.
That's correct.
And I just want to ask you about one passage, please, which is, I think, the only reference to the litigation. If we scroll down, please. Thank you. Can you see It's now about halfway down the page, just beyond halfway. It says, resolve the post office litigation situation quickly and put it behind us and move on. Not the huge public relations risk that Bays believe it to be. Firstly, who is that a note of speaking?
That's the note of the comments that Tim made at the dinner, which I think, as all the notes are, it was his set of priorities for me and his commentary.
Was this, in addition to him speaking, an agreed position between you and him?
Sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
Yes. Does this record what you agreed should occur? I.e., you should resolve the litigation quickly, put it behind you and move on?
These are the actions and priorities that he suggested that I would want to do and what he saw me doing.
And was that therefore something that you thereafter carried into effect?
I guess this is the backdrop to the job that I was going to take on. I saw it as an important meeting because it was giving Tim the opportunity to give me his perspective, having been chair for 6 years at this stage. It was an opportunity for Tim to give me his perspective on the business before I joined, so this was some 10 or 12 days before I actually started. And it was his opportunity to describe to me what he saw going on in the organisation and where he thought I should spend my time. So that was the contemporaneous notes that I took of that meeting, which was my recollection of how he described it to me.
And can you help us, not all of us move in the circles of CEOs and chairmen, when a chairman says you're to resolve the litigation quickly, put it behind us and move on, is that an instruction that you carry into effect? Or is it something which you think, well, the old man is just spouting, I'll do what I want?
No, I think as I was brand new to the organisation, it was important for me to understand where he saw the priorities. I mean, looking at the list, there are, gosh, looks like 12, 14, 16 issues that he has highlighted here.
Yes.
And this is one of those, and clearly I would take this information with me as a sort of aide-memoire as I go into the organisation. That was the purpose of the meeting. I wanted to check my understanding of what he had suggested with what I then found in those first 4 to 6 weeks within the organisation. That was the purpose for me of the meeting, rather than getting a set of instructions. I didn't view this as a set of instructions.
Do they come from the board instructions rather than the chairman speaking at a dinner?
Well, technically, the chairman would give me a set of objectives formally, which is what he did on a yearly basis. This wasn't that. This was a first meeting.
Yeah. It's recorded that, quote, not the huge PR risk that Bays believe it to be. Is that Mr. Parker speaking too?
Yes, it is.
And so he was saying that the litigation was not the huge public relations risk to the post office that the government believed it to be.
That's correct.
I think you, in due course, came to understand that what is suggested here, resolution of the litigation quickly, putting it behind you and moving on, was wrong-headed. There was no way that the GLO could be quickly resolved and put behind you, was there?
No.
Interestingly, it seems that the government knew that. Did you ever explore that view with the government?
Yes, I go on to mention in my witness statement that there seemed to be two sort of schools. I think Greg Clark was the Secretary of State at the time. His view was very much around finding and seeking resolution with the postmasters and ensuring that there was redress. And that was the prevailing view, certainly, that I was given from officials, that Greg Clark had. It seemed to be less the case amongst officials, but certainly from the politicians, if that makes sense.
And what do you mean less the case amongst officials?
What do I mean by that? There wasn't a determination to settle necessarily with the postmasters. I didn't feel that in those opening months within the business, and that seemed slightly at odds with the position that Greg Clark was adopting.
Was there, thank you, that can come down. Was there a view within the Post Office at this time that the civil judgments did not really impact upon any past criminal proceedings?
You describe that a bit more. What do you mean by that?
Yes. Was it the view within either the General Executive or the Board, or in particular the legal function within the Post Office, that the civil judgments, the Horizon Issues Judgment and the Common Issues Judgment, did not impact on past criminal proceedings?
Yes, I think that's the case.
And who was expressing that view?
I don't think I can. It's a sense. I mean, I'm not saying people were expressing that view explicitly. I think that's just a sense that I took.
By this time, over some years, periodically, the Criminal Cases Review Commission had been corresponding with the Post Office.
Yeah.
Were you made aware of that in September, October 2019?
Yes, I would believe so. I'm trying to think explicitly how and by whom. I think, as I say, at the start, the level of briefing that I received was relatively perfunctory, as opposed to in-depth and critical, which I think is the point that you're making. That was not the case.
Well, I just wondered whether the significance of there being correspondence with the Criminal Cases Review Commission was explicitly, well, explained to you.
Not in September, no.
No, right, fine.
And subsequently?
Subsequently later, but not in September. I mean, I think this is this would have been post-litigation, and it would have been well into 2020 before we had those conversations.
Ultimately, the Court of Appeal Criminal Division essentially accepted and adopted the findings of the High Court that throughout the relevant period there were significant problems with Horizon, which problems gave rise to a material risk that an apparent shortfall in branch accounts did not in fact reflect missing cash or stock, but had been caused by or more than one bug, error or defect in Horizon, and that the Post Office knew that there were problems at that time with Horizon. When was that first made clear to you, the connection between what had been found in the civil judgments and its impact upon criminal appeals?
Probably in September and October 2019, it became well, no, maybe that's not strictly true. I think it may have been as a consequence of the release of the HIJ findings in November. That, I think, triggered conversations about the robustness of Horizon and the implications for the legacy and HGNX versions of Horizon and the implications of potential bugs and what they may or may not have done. That was as a consequence of the judgment that was handed down in November.
In relation to the differences of view between the politicians and the civil servants, can we look, please, at what you say on page 20 of your witness statement, paragraph 44? page 20, para 44. You say these variations in strategic focus were reflected in the Minister and Permanent Secretary. Greg Clark, the Minister, when I arrived, was clear we should focus on postmasters and afford redress arising from the court judgment in 2019. That's essentially what you said to us 2 or 3 minutes ago. He wanted to solve things for the postmasters and make sure that the injustices were genuinely settled. Alex Chisholm, Bay's Secretary, was more closely aligned with the board priorities and was not pushing for a settlement, and to some extent did not see the need to broker a new deal with postmasters. He wanted a short, independent, 4-month review so we could move on. I could focus on the day job of moving the post office forward. His view was more closely aligned with the board around the need for speed towards financial sustainability. This left a somewhat unclear agreement as to which priorities took precedence. Firstly, what did you do in the face of an unclear picture from your shareholder?
Well, let me take a step back. I think I met with Alex Chisholm and spoke to him specifically about the independent review, and I'm sure we'll come and talk about that in a second. But the specifics, I think, and the point that I was trying to make here was that postmasters had been left behind in the pursuit of profit. That I was very clear about in terms of what had happened in 2016 to 2019 with the drive for network transformation and commercial sustainability and reducing the subsidy. In that drive, I believed that postmasters had been left behind, and by that I mean the move from fixed fee payments to postmasters to variable payments to postmasters to the level of support that was given to postmasters was not where it needed to be. And it was my intention to refocus the organisation around what I saw as the central core to the post office, which was the relationship between the postmaster and its local communities, and that's how we had to focus upon it. That was slightly at odds, I think, with where the officials were, which was very much around trying to ensure that we didn't continue to spend money on the post office and that we could reduce, as I say, the subsidy and the like. And I think there was an attitude that was very much around trying to ring fence and ensure that the post office was a standalone business without really thinking through what the implications of that were for postmasters, a new deal, understanding how variable pay worked, what sort of support they would be provided with. And it was that juxtaposition that I was struggling to address.
As well as the approach to be taken to the GLO, there was also the issue, is this right, of to what extent there should be an investigation or an inquiry into the past?
Yes.
Can we look, please, at pages 27 to 28 of your witness statement? Paragraph 61, second line. You say, as mentioned, Permanent Secretary Alex Chisholm had initially wanted this to be just to be a review and not an inquiry, and that whilst it should be independent, essentially internal, and importantly be forward-looking. That had been the plan from February 2020, when the Prime Minister announced the review would look at historical failings. Later in 2020, when the Minister announced the inquiry, it was truly a pivotal moment for the organisation as a whole to fully grapple with the process that it needed to go through and the changes required. Para 62, by the summer it had developed into a judge-led independent inquiry, which was only meant to last 4 months. this was reformulated into the terms of reference that currently apply in January 2021. And so is it right that in this earlier period, Mr. Chisholm continued to think that the problems exposed by the group litigation could be addressed by a small internal inquiry?
Yes, that's precisely the point I was making.
Was he of the view that we saw expressed in your note with of your dinner with Mr. Parker that the Post Office had a significant PR disaster on its hands?
I can't comment on what his view on that was.
Did he ever explain to you whether a view of the extent of the wrongdoing had influenced his decision or suggestion that there should be a short internal inquiry to essentially manage away the problem?
The conversations I had with Mr. Chisholm on this particular topic, I had become very clear by early 2020 that there was a growing need and desire amongst those who had been impacted by the scandal to get to the truth, to understand what had happened, why it had happened, and who was responsible, as opposed to the notion that we have an inquiry to make sure nothing like this could happen again. And I think this was the point I'm trying to make here, is that there was a clear distinction that, and the conversation I had with Mr. Chisholm was that closure would not be achieved if we simply looked forward to see what had been done by the Post Office to ensure nothing could happen again, rather than addressing what it was that the victims of the scandal particularly wanted, which was to understand why it had happened, who was responsible, and what was going to be done as a consequence of that. And it was that I struggled with. And Mr. Chisholm assured me that that we would do a 4-month forward-looking review to ensure that the Post Office was now in a position where nothing like this could happen again.
Thank you. That can come down. Can I turn to a different topic, namely the culture within the Post Office in your 5 years as CEO, and in particular its attitude towards the guilt or innocence of sub-postmasters? As a general question, have you come across individuals within the organisation who adopt the view that some sub-postmasters whose convictions have been quashed are nonetheless guilty?
I don't think I could say specifically that is the case, but there will be a view that not every quashed conviction will be innocent postmasters. I think, and certainly if I was to reflect, I think the majority of the organisation would agree that the action that has been taken is absolutely the right action, and whether there are guilty postmasters who will be exonerated really is no longer an issue. That is not something that is of concern to people in the Post Office.
Can we turn, please, to paragraph 27 of your first witness statement, please? Which is on page 13. you say Post Office is in many ways a different organisation to the Post Office of the past. Yes?
Yes.
I'm underlining the words of the past
yes.
At the moment. And then similarly, in this witness statement, when you, paragraph 174, which is on page 84, you say Post Office recognises the need for fundamental cultural change. It recognises the presence of oppressive behaviour and intimidating actions in the past. It's those words that I'm underlining, which led to a lack of respect and trust between the Post Office and its postmasters. It acknowledges there has been a lack of effective leadership, a lack of effective training and support, and a lack of responsibility within the organisation. It accepts that it has work to do to restore trust with postmasters and the public as a whole. Cultural changes in the Post Office are integral to the rebuilding of that trust. If those sentiments are correct, why is it that those who were involved in the investigation and prosecution, the wrongful prosecution of sub-postmasters, are some of the same personnel who are involved in the handling of compensation claims under the Horizon Shortfall Scheme, which includes their attendance with sub-postmasters at good faith meetings?
I've been very clear that at no stage will we walk past allegations of wrongdoing in the organisation, and I've made that very clear publicly to all colleagues and to postmasters themselves. Where evidence of wrongdoing is brought to my attention, or indeed to anybody else's attention within the organisation, we will investigate and we will take action fully, and that's very much what we will do. With regard to the remediation unit, I'm very clear that we have conducted a piece of work which you've heard a lot about at this inquiry, which is referred to as the past roles piece of work. And once again, I am confident that there are not individuals involved in postmaster-facing activity that had roles in the past where allegations or anything of wrongdoing has been brought to my attention.
When you say there are not, do you mean as we sit here today?
Yes, we have.
Can you say that there have not?
Or there have not been individuals in,
yes.
in those units.
Yes.
As you'll be aware from the last couple of days, we have individuals who are under investigation specifically. I'm not convinced it would be appropriate to raise those. We have,
I'm not asking you to name them at all.
Thank you. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that we're not walking past these situations, and we will address them where those allegations are made, and ensure that law enforcement and other activity takes place.
But we're 5 years on now from the Horizon Issues judgment, aren't we?
We are.
And so you can't say that there have not been individuals who were involved in the improper investigation and the wrongful prosecution of postmasters who were involved in the handling of compensation scheme claims under the HSS.
Involved, it depends what you mean by involved. I guess certainly from my perspective, when I look at the construct of the remediation unit and the work that we've done on past roles and on Project Phoenix, I would absolutely concede that that work has not gone quickly enough. I would absolutely concede that we needed to be more forthright, I think, in our actions. By that I mean giving confidence to postmasters who were coming forward in the HSS scheme or involved in the HSS scheme that genuine independence and no sign of bias was taking place in the delivery of any form of compensation. And that is absolutely what we are doing and are determined to do.
Have part of the investigations that have been conducted included the question of whether investigators were given bonuses related to the number of successful prosecutions they conducted and or the recovery of money under the Proceeds of Crime Act?
I'm not aware that we've done a specific piece of work into that allegation, but I may be mistaken. I don't believe we have.
Can we look, please, at poll 0011 3304? Thank you. This, before we get into the detail of it, is an email chain that takes place between May and July 2021, started by a man called Gary Thomas, a former post office investigator, addressed in the first instance to you, in which he is complaining about the post office's ill treatment of its own investigators and security managers. And if we can sort of read it first as a whole, and then I'll ask some questions about it.
This is a standalone email, is it? This
No,
one,
we'll look at the whole chain.
Oh, we'll look at the chain.
So if we go to page 5 to see where it picks up, please. And if we just go up, please. Keep going. Essentially, he cuts into an email, earlier emails that he suggests were sent. If we just go down to page 5, please. This is seemingly an email addressed to you. And he says he's writing in relation to all the Horizon system prosecutions that were conducted by Post Office against sub-postmasters that have been successfully challenged and won in the High Court. His question to you and the new board is the actual effect this whole situation has had on himself and the other investigators employed by Post Office. We were informed by Post Office that the Horizon system was 100% correct. The Horizon data we obtained to provide evidence was all accurate and again 100% correct. If we skip that paragraph and then the next paragraph, pick up with I took redundancy. He says, I took redundancy from Post Office in 2017 after 32 years loyal and committed service and now have to live with this every day, as do my other security colleagues I've recently spoken to. And then this, we even had a proceeds of crime unit within the Post Office that ensured that some of these individuals lost their homes and families. And then this, in fact, my yearly objectives were, that were bonus worthy at the time, were based on numbers of successful prosecutions and recovery of amounts of money to the business. I had some instances of these postmasters committing suicide, which now sits somewhat on my, I think that's conscience, because of my employer. How do you think I deal with this and now actually sleep at night knowing my actions that were backed and supported by my employer has affected the said postmasters? So a suggestion that yearly objectives of an investigator, which were bonus worthy, included the number of successful prosecutions and the recovery of money to the business. You see that?
Yes, I can see that.
And then if we go up to page 4, please. If we scroll down, please. This was the reply. If we scroll down a little further. He's actually cut off who the reply was from. This is said to be the Post Office's reply. I'm writing on behalf of the Post Office to thank you and respond to your email to Nick Reed dated the 9th of May. That's where I got the first date from,
yes.
May 2021. We're working hard to improve Post Office, address the past, and fundamentally reform for the future by putting postmasters at the heart of everything we do. Your email has drawn our attention to the prospect that Post Office employees may have been incentivised to bring successful prosecutions. We have not currently identified this to be the case. However, we have instructed our lawyers to find, recover, and review relevant material as part of our post-conviction disclosure exercise, the PCDE. It's the PCDE that's assisted those prosecuted by Post Office to have their convictions rightly overturned. The review of this material will allow Post Office to recognise and, if necessary, address this issue as part of our wider duty to those who were convicted. And then if we go to page 3, please. This is Mr. Thomas's reply. And if we scroll down, please. And scroll down. I'm just missing the paragraph I'm looking for. If we scroll back up, please. There, stop. In that 4th paragraph, beginning, I will advise, he says, I will advise you now to save you more time, that you will find nothing in any PCDE about any incentives for prosecutions. But if you still hold historical HR records on individuals, personal and business objectives each year, then I can assure you, you will see the targets for prosecutions and financial recovery targets. The recoveries, if not voluntary, were carried out under the Proceeds of Crime Act, where I know the security team paid to train at least 3 or 4 of my colleagues to carry out such work. This meant if it was proven that the prosecuted postmaster was found guilty or admitted any guilt, they could make serious recoveries over and above the amounts found to be missing under the Benefits of Crime Act, including some postmasters' life savings and homes. And then page 2, please. Thank you. We now actually get an email from Stuart Lill. If we scroll down, please. You'll see he signs that off. And if we go back up, please, we'll see that this isn't a reply to Mr. Thomas's email. It's distributed amongst those within the business, including people with whom we are familiar, Roderick Williams, Melanie Caulfield, and Nick Vamos. This is headed former investigator email to Nick Reed update. Below is the response from Gary Thomas. Sorry, before I read it, are any of those people in the distribution list part of your general executive correspondence team or anything similar, PA, chief staff? Can you identify that person?
Aveen was my PA at the time.
And so you're included on this distribution list by the inclusion of her as a recipient. Is that right?
That's not normally how it works. I mean, I would be normally put in the 2 or the CC box if it was designed to come to me, but it does seem strange that it's been directed to her and not to me.
So what would Ms. Regan do if she received an email such as this?
Well, I sincerely hope she would share it with me.
And so this is essentially for your attention as a person to whom the email was addressed, albeit by a circuitous distribution route.
You would assume it was directed for me, yes.
Anyway,
I'm not familiar with it, but yeah.
I interrupted myself. Below is the response from Gary Thomas, who raised issues about the performance targets given to former Post Office investigators, and then he, Stuart, has included the email chain. This email is difficult to respond to for the following reasons. And then under 2, there is a new allegation that Post Office were benefiting more than they were entitled to from the benefits of Crime Act, presumably the proceeds of Crime Act. 3, it makes allegations as to the knowledge about Horizon's failings by senior Post Office officials. Whilst Mr. Thomas does not say it expressly in either of his emails, this appears to be an attempt to negotiate a payment for Post Office. Otherwise, there is little need to raise or threaten speaking to a solicitor. Further allegations are made, although Peters & Peters will note that he has narrowed and clarified his previous point regarding objectives. It seems to me that this email conversation needs to be closed down, as Post Office are unlikely to be able to address the issues or allegations he makes, either for proper, sensible legal reasons or because Mr. Thomas appears to be using it as a forerunner to seek legal advice. Grateful for input. And then if we go to page 1. The same distribution list, I think, again from Mr. Lill. Post Office has no employment obligations to Mr. Thomas. With regard to the whistleblowing policy, this can catch, and so Peters & Peters will or are drafting a proposal regarding investigating and responding to it. This is in order to ensure that we uphold our own policy, demonstrate we've dealt with the issue if it were to be raised at the inquiry or elsewhere. I've drafted the response for consideration and comment. And if we scroll down, thank you for your email. Second paragraph, reiterate its sincerest apologies for any negative attention you or your former colleagues have received as a result of your time at the Post Office. And then this, which is the substance of the reply, it's not appropriate for the Post Office to comment on the general matters you raise at this time. As you're aware, Post Office is involved in ongoing legal proceedings and is actively supporting and contributing to the statutory inquiry led by Sir Wyn Williams. You stated you'll wait until the Post Office has addressed your questions and points before seeking the advice of a solicitor. Whilst it's not clear what specific matters you're referring to or why it requires advice from a solicitor, it's a matter for you. So that's the chain of correspondence. Given the addressee, your PA, Ms. Regan, were you aware of this correspondence with Mr. Thomas?
No, I have no recollection of this correspondence.
Were you aware of the suggestion that it was said that Post Office investigators and or security managers had yearly bonus objectives based on the number of successful prosecutions that they undertook?
I think my understanding of that came from the inquiry as opposed to from individuals within the Post Office per se. I think it's an allegation certainly been made in this forum as opposed to more broadly at the Post Office.
What about the suggestion that there were yearly bonus objectives based on the amounts recovered for the Post Office?
I guess my immediate reaction to this is the lack of curiosity to understand whether that is the case.
That's where I'm heading, Mr. Reid.
Yeah, I'm surprised that the tone of the response is let's just close this down, as opposed to where is the curiosity that says this is something that was going on. I think it would have been extremely illuminating culturally to understand if that had been the case.
I think it follows that you weren't aware of the suggestion that prosecution targets and financial recovery targets might be found in Post Office's historical HR records under personal and business objectives.
No, I wasn't, and as far as I'm aware, that hasn't been explored. I may be mistaken, but I don't believe it to be the case.
One of the parties receiving this email chain was Mr. Declan Salter.
Yes.
And from memory, when I first became involved in this, he had an important position, did he not, in the Post Office?
Yes, he did.
Make that public, please.
Yes, he did, sir. Declan Salter was in charge of the inquiry team and the remediation unit, which was combined at that early stage. So he came in to do that piece of work.
If we scroll back down, please, to the distribution list. At the top of page 2, he's the first addressee. I think we know the functions that Mr. Williams and Ms. Caulfield were performing at this time. Can you help us with Hannah Laming?
I can't, no. I'm not familiar with Hannah Laming.
The generic email address flag case advisor. I think we've seen that before.
It's not one that I'm familiar with.
Okay. Thomas Jennings?
No, again, not a name I'm familiar with.
Catherine Emanuel?
Yes, she is from Herbert Smith Freehills.
Andrew Robinson?
No, I'm not familiar with that name.
Tim Perkins?
Yes, Tim works in the organisation. Tim is currently the People Services Director.
And at this time in 2021?
I'm guessing he was working for Declan, but I could be mistaken. Alternatively, he may well, actually on reflection, have worked in the operations team, retail operations.
Eamon McCarthy-Keane?
No, that's not a name I'm familiar with.
Okay, so some of these people, including Miss Laming, for example, might be lawyers within, for example, Peters and Peters.
Right.
Which may be why you're not familiar with them. I think it follows, from at least from this chain, that you didn't reply that, hold on, I disagree with the suggestion made by Stuart Lill that this conversation with Mr. Thomas needs to be closed down.
I'm not familiar with this exchange. It may be that I did see it, but I don't recall.
Was this correspondence emblematic of a view within Post Office, even at July 2021, that people that raised issues as to the past and the past conduct of investigations and prosecutions ought to be closed down?
No, I don't believe that to be the case.
This is unusual then, this is, goes against the grain.
Yes, I think that certainly by 2021, the Hamilton judgment would have been alive already by then. I think the business by this stage was coming to terms with the past. I don't think that was something, as I mentioned at the start, was necessarily the case in 2019, 2020, but I think it clearly was coming to terms with the role that it had played in the past. So I am surprised, yes.
So I'm about to move within a topic to another subtopic. Might we take the morning break until 10 to?
Yeah, certainly.
Thank you very much. Mr. Reid, can I continue to seek to explore the topic of post offices' attitude and approach to sub-postmasters who
Yes.
have a shortfall alleged against them, or a shortfall is detected, including those who in the past had been convicted of criminal offences on the basis of such shortfalls being alleged. And look at the issue of Mr. Jacobs, Elliot Jacobs. In your third witness statement, there's no need to turn it up, it's paragraphs 237 to 239. You refer to the Post Office's investigation concerning Elliot Jacobs, and I think this was known as Project Venus.
That's
Venus,
correct.
is that right? And you tell us about a conversation on the 10th of January between Mr. Staunton, Mr. Jacobs, and Mr. Ismail when they raised concerns about the Post Office's treatment of sub-postmasters. We're going to look
Yes.
at that in a moment. Can I look at something that happened before then, in November 2023? Poll 0044 8693. This is an email to you from Mr. Staunton of the 25th of November 2023. And I think it's just to you. And he says, Nick, I drove home yesterday and had to deal with a number of calls from both Saf and Elliot, so that's Saf Ismail and Elliot Jacobs. I will not repeat some of their comments, but I'm annoyed that this has blown up. They think that Ben is stirring this thing up, even though it has been investigated. And just stopping there, the thing that's being spoken about here, would you agree, is the investigation into an alleged shortfall at Mr. Jacobs' branch?
That's correct.
Found the differences to be de minimis and well within differences that may arise on a trading account running to under £1 million per annum. It's been looked at by a subcommittee of Lorna and Amanda. There were comments about the, quote, old post office. Things have not changed that much. Post office management think all postmasters are crooks, etc. Their personal integrity is being questioned, etc., etc. I suggested they talk to Tom regarding the proposed note in the ARA of which they're unaware, who helped in his replies, which I'm grateful. Catherine says she only found about this a day ago, but then thought she would brief all the directors a day later without the full facts. Anyway, I've suggested we hold off until you and I chat. I needed to spend hours yesterday on this like a hole in a head. What's behind this? Am I missing something, etc.? The suggestion that seemingly made by Messrs. Ismail and Jacobs about the old post office and post office management currently thinking that postmasters are all crooks. Is that a view that has been expressed by them to you?
I don't think before or around the time of this email. I think that's something that has happened subsequently. I think both of them gave evidence to that effect, that they had raised that in a board conversation, I recall.
How did you react to the those suggestions that were being made in this email to you? Essentially, if I summarise,
Yes.
that the two postmaster non-executive directors were suggesting to the chairman that post office management think that all postmasters are crooks.
I think I'd probably try and separate two elements to this email. I think one is the potential investigation into SAF and to Elliot, and two is this notion that all management think they're crooks. I certainly don't think all management are of that opinion. In fact, I absolutely don't think that at all. On the topic of this particular situation, and I think it's perhaps quite important to talk a little bit more about the context of this investigation, if that's okay. The allegations that were sort of put to me around Elliot Jacobs' situation in terms of his liability to the business was something that I passed to the company secretary and the chairman, which is why Henry Staunton's obviously discussing it now, for them to decide what the best course of action should be, and that I think is important context. As a board director himself, Elliot, it was important that the chairman was overseeing this activity. I think it's fair to say that the approach was heavy-handed. I think I would say that to Project Venus. I think it was...
And sorry to stop you there.
Yeah.
I think the suggestion was that over a 6 to 10 year period, the suggestion was some £15,000 of debt had been built up on a business that was trading at about £1 million a year, and that's why it was thought to be de minimis. Is that right?
Not quite. I think the liabilities were 198,000 to my recollection. The settlement, which ultimately was done by or agreed with Mel Parks and her team in the operations, was that identifying loss, for want of a better word, that should be repaid was some 16,000, as is mentioned here. So I think it's a slightly nuanced in the sense that there was a larger shortfall that was on the account, but actually once investigations had been done, once the teams had worked, once the operational team had worked with Elliot and his teams, we concluded that actually the shortfall was around 16,000. So yes.
I mean, if we just look over the page to see an email addressed to Ben Fote and Catherine Sherratt from Mr. Staunton, he summarises it in the second paragraph, second sentence. A lengthy investigation found that Elliot owed under 15,000 built up over 6 to 10 years. Bearing in mind that about £1 million a year is transacted, they believe that the amount is de minimis. Why do you say that the investigation into this postmaster, Ned, was heavy-handed?
I think certainly looking at the approach that was recommended and suggested, which was originally to do unannounced visits to Elliot's branches. I think you will have seen emails to that effect, in order to try and establish what the current loss was an extraordinary recommendation by the team. I think, as Elliot has rightly pointed out, a more sensible and more balanced approach would have been to employ members of the operations team to look into it in a joint way with Elliot, and that, I think, would have been a more effective and more efficient way of doing it. The reason I say it's heavy-handed is that clearly there was an issue with how this was going to be recorded in the report and accounts. Clearly there was an issue with the volume and alleged volume of shortfall, and I think it would be fair to say that the sort of over-enthusiastic investigative approach was heavy-handed, and that there were other ways that this could have been addressed.
Going back to page 1, please. second sentence in first paragraph, that's Messrs Ismail and Jacobs, think that Ben, that's Mr Foat, is stirring things up, even though it has been investigated, etc. What did you understand to be the suggestion against Mr Foat?
I think, I think this goes back to the fact that the investigation team sits within Ben Foat's area of responsibility. They work to him as the General Counsel. And I think, therefore, by association, they were assuming that Ben was the determinant of the investigation, the manner of the investigation, and the activity that occurred as a consequence.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit unsure that you're actually addressing the point that Mr. Beer is trying to get at. And can I just remind you that the evidence, I think, from both Mr. Staunton and Mr. Elliott was that the investigation had taken place in April. Then there'd been what Mr. Elliott described as a series of meetings, which were, quote, business meetings, which resolved the issue.
Yes.
And his complaint thereafter, as I'd understood it, to the inquiry, was that the investigative department, and Mr. Foat in particular, had taken a long time to actually formally close the investigation. Now, it seems to me that this all happening in November 2023 is some kind of complaint about Mr. Foat still pursuing an investigation, if you see what I mean. Or that's how it reads, yeah, if you put it into the context that I just described, which I think is an accurate summary of Mr. Elliott and Mr. Staunton's evidence.
It is.
So, do you know of what was going on in November 2023, which caused this to resurrect itself, so to speak?
So not specifically. I'm assuming because Catherine Sherratt was engaged in this process, it had to do with what director liabilities to the company were going to be put into the report and accounts. And if the investigation hadn't been formally closed down, which by the sounds of things it hadn't in terms of specifically, that was giving rise to some concern. I think you're quite right that a 7-month investigation into some alleged shortfalls seems an inordinate length of time, and I think that's absolutely the case. And I think that, well, I know that the investigations team would recognise that that was the case. So yes, I think there is some disappointment, certainly on behalf of Elliott, and I heard what he said 2 weeks ago, that the retail team were businesslike and confident in the way that they engaged with him to resolve the issue, and it would have been far easier to have done it that way than to have had something more formal, and what obviously took place.
Can we move forwards, please, to January 2024? This was in November 2023, again in relation to views expressed by your sub-postmaster, non-executive directors. By looking at poll 0044-8302. And if we can look at page 4, please. This is a note sent by Mr. Staunton to himself by way of a contemporaneous note of a conversation that he had 4 days previously on the 10th of January 2014. The note is dated the 14th of January 2014. I'll read it. SAF said the views expressed by Richard Taylor and previously by management and even members of the board still persisted, those postmasters who'd not come forward to be exonerated were, quote, guilty as charged. It is a deep view in the culture of the organisation, including at board level, including that postmasters are not to be trusted. Something needs to be done in capital letters. Martin Roberts and certain members of his team were singled out. There's been no feedback on the investigation into Mr. Roberts, including for inappropriate behaviour and a lack of integrity. He was responsible for the postage stamps debacle where changes were made to accounts by his team, just like Fujitsu. If Elliott had not been on the ARC, the controls would not have been strengthened. Mr. Roberts and his team do not want any extension to their terms of office, as they believe new postmasters would not have the experience to challenge them. And then scroll down. Equally, Saf and Elliott are, in capital letters, fed up with the amount of power wielded by Foat. He and other members of the senior team act as if, in capitals, postmasters are guilty until proved innocent. And then in brackets and in quotations, as per my experience, they both said. No one believes us is a constant refrain from postmasters. And then in capitals, whilst Foat is at the helm, nothing will change. We must also part company with all those investigators who behaved so terribly with postmasters. What on earth is happening if Steve Bradshaw is still with us? His performance at the inquiry was a disgrace and reflected terribly on Post Office. Foat uses his leadership of the inquiry team as an instrument of his power. It all has to stop. The postmaster, quote, is not the enemy, end quote. Another quote, only postmasters can solve this and tell us how to change. JB is an ex-policeman. His behaviour has been unacceptable and he needs to move on to prove we have changed. And then skipping a paragraph, there are some 48 people involved in investigations. There were over 40, just like Bradshaw. These people need to go. Project Phoenix was allowed by Foat to go into the long grass. Bradshaw went into one of Saf's stores some years ago and immediately said, quote, we are closing you down. Postmasters tell him not much has changed since. There is a complete lack of respect for postmasters, and that has to change. And if we just scroll to the bottom, I don't think there's anything else that's relevant. He ends with a note to himself, a lot in this note to consider and take forward with the board. The reference to 40 people who are just like Mr. Bradshaw, investigators. Have you ever referred to such people as the untouchables?
No, I haven't.
Mr. Staunton, no need to turn it up, WITN 11410100 at paragraph 107, and on the 1st of October when he gave evidence to us, page 109, line 7, states that you used the term to him both privately and in a meeting. Is he incorrect?
He is incorrect.
Mr. Ismail says that you use the term untouchables to refer to some individuals within Post Office in two contexts, in a private NED-only meeting and in a board meeting. Is he incorrect?
He is.
Mr. Jacobs said that you used the term in the context of a NED-only meeting. Is he incorrect?
Yes, he is.
Are you familiar with the term?
Well, I've obviously seen a lot of it in the media, seen a lot of it in the press. Obviously, it has occurred in this forum as well. I think there's a lot of conflation between what has been described. There's this notion that there are 40 untouchables who are investigators from the past. That is not an expression that is used in the organisation. That is not an expression that is familiar to the organisation. I also discovered that 2 weeks ago, as part of the disclosure exercise, that there was an investigation conducted by Andrew Dufour into the comments that I made at the Select Committee, and this was obviously one of the areas of investigation. And as I discovered 2 weeks ago, I was unfamiliar that an investigation had been conducted, but it was. And it was found that that was not the case, that this is not an expression that's used more widely in the organisation. This is not an expression that I've either used 40 investigators or 40 untouchables. So I can say with some confidence that this idea of 40 untouchables is not something that is widely used in the organisation.
In any event, given that phase 4 of the inquiry was ongoing at the time of the conversation that this note refers to in January 2024, were you concerned by these reports from Mr. Ismail and Mr. Elliott?
As in the commentary that he's written here, of course.
And so
very concerned.
What action did you take?
This obviously occurred at the time that the Pineapple email was in circulation. I think you'll be familiar with how that occurred. Just to sort of take you back to the mechanics of this, this was an email that emerged, I think, on a Sunday night, inadvertently sent to me by Henry Staunton. I sent it on inadvertently, given that there was no identification in the subject matter box of the email, or indeed any confidentiality associated with it. Inadvertently sent it on to colleagues in order to help me write a response to the Voice of Postmaster group, which is what Henry had asked me to do.
We're going to come to that in a moment.
Oh, okay.
But just on the, I inadvertently disclosed it to colleagues. You disclosed it to Mr. Roberts and Mr. Fote.
That's correct.
Who were the targets of the allegations.
That is correct. Yes. At 8 o'clock the following morning, I dropped a note to both Saf and Elliott and said that I was very sorry that the situation had occurred. It had been completely inadvertent in terms of a mistake on my part, and that I would be very happy to speak with them. I recommended that we have a Teams call, the three of us, in that email. Saf was unable to join it, and so I therefore had a call with Elliott to apologise, and I didn't have a chance to speak to Saf until the following week, which is when we had a board meeting, and so it did go unanswered.
As to the substance of what was said, rather than that difficult handling issue that followed, what did you do?
I spoke with both Mr. Roberts and with Mr. Fote about the allegations that had been made. Clearly, it was quite a difficult conversation because clearly it had been released to them both, and they were angry and upset about the fact that that this had come to light, and more importantly, they were angry and upset that Saf and Elliott had that view of them. So it was a difficult conversation. But again, certainly from my perspective, the challenge, I think, for Ben and in particular was the management of the investigations unit and how we were deploying it. And I think it is important to make a very clear distinction between how investigations work at the Post Office now and how they worked historically, if you'd like me to just describe that.
I think we'll come on to that
Okay.
in probably a passage in this afternoon's questioning. But this suggested that Mr. Fote had allowed Project Phoenix to go into the long grass. What was done as a result of that suggestion?
Just going on to Project Phoenix very explicitly, this is a source of some frustration in the sense that we haven't moved quickly enough. And I know that the inquiry has seen emails to that effect. I certainly have been and was keener that we were more forthright in terms of how we addressed individuals who would be in a potential position of postmaster-facing activity, either those who were involved specifically in the scandal or those who weren't. But Project Phoenix, just to remind everybody, is formed of two very, very distinct parts. The first part is it's individuals who were named during the human impact hearings, and it also is individuals who may have been involved in activity that resulted in the prosecution of postmasters. And secondly, it was as a consequence of the restorative justice meetings that myself and Simon Recaldin and subsequently others have taken part in over the last 18 months or so. The combination of which is we obviously heard about individuals during those restorative justice meetings and clearly needed to investigate the allegations that had been made to us by the victims. And that's clearly what Project Phoenix is about. There are 47 particular case studies that have emerged through the human impact hearing and through the restorative justice meetings. And we have distilled those down to 6 individuals, 3 of whom have no case to answer the allegations. We haven't found corroborating evidence for. We've looked through, I believe, 130,000 different documents. We've interviewed many of the people who I spoke to at the restorative justice meeting and indeed who were at the human impact hearings to see if we can find and understand what occurred. 3 individuals, however, are now under further investigation both by the Post Office and by external agencies. So would it have been, and do I wish that we could have moved more quickly with Project Phoenix? Yes, I do. So I have sympathy with Elliot and Saf's view. I think...
What was the cause of the pace?
Primarily because we needed to speak to the individuals who had been involved, who had made these allegations, I think, and then obviously trying to find corroborating evidence. And as you've heard in this inquiry, that's not often easy at Post Office to get the right data and the right disclosure and the right information to help us understand precisely what had happened. That could be recordings, that could be records of interviews, that there's a number of different things that we looked to do, but it was frustrating.
Just stopping you there, just to make sure I haven't misunderstood your answer.
Yes.
You've said a couple of times that you looked for corroborating evidence, which may have a special magic for some lawyers. In order to find a case to answer, are you saying that there had to be something additional to that which the postmaster said, i.e. some independent evidence coming from somebody other than the postmaster?
Well, I think the recordings, as an example, and the records of the meetings would be obviously areas that we would be looking at to try and understand whether or not the allegations that have been made, could stand up.
So you weren't literally meaning corroborating evidence?
No, I mean, what I meant was supporting evidence, I guess, fully investigating each of the allegations that had arisen, and that, as I say, involved specifically speaking with those victims who had come forward, and I'm certainly of the opinion that that took quite a long time to organise, quite a lot of time to bring together, but too slow. And I think perhaps if I took a step back, I would say that the investigations unit specifically is pretty overwhelmed with activity at the moment, and that may well have been a reason why the pace was slower than we would have hoped.
Can we turn to what we just discussed then, namely the handling of the email, by looking at poll 00448564? and turn to page 3, please. And we should briefly look at page 4, just so we can see what was included. And just the bottom of page 3. Thank you. An email to Mr. Staunton copied to Mr. Ismail and Mr. Jacobs, containing a suggested email to the board, and then the suggested email includes in its second paragraph, please see attached a file note I prepared following my conversation with Saf and Elliot on Sunday. That's the file note that we just looked at. Yes?
Understood, yes.
And then if we go to page 3, please. Mr. Staunton, by these emails, essentially provided that Project Pineapple note to you on the 17th of January. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And then if we go to page 2, please. And scroll down, please. This is the email that you were referring to, I think, a moment ago, Mr. Reid. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Where you send the chain on, including the file note.
That's correct.
To Martin Roberts and Ben Fote, saying, can you produce a suitable response for Henry? You'll be aware of my views from discussions we've had. I assume there are GFA restrictions too. What does that refer to?
The grant funding agreement with the NFSP.
And if we scroll up, please. Stop there. This is Mr. Fote's reply, second paragraph. The Project Pineapple email contained very serious allegations of which I've not been made aware. Given the circumstances, I'd be conflicted. And then scroll up, please. Mr. Roberts' reply, having read the email below, I'm in the same place, not knowing what Project Pineapple is and never having been made aware of the allegations against me and my team. I feel conflicted. You tell us in your witness statement, the cross-reference is paragraph 243, as you've done today, that you forwarded this chain inadvertently to Messrs. Fote and Roberts. Is that right?
That's correct.
You say that you didn't open the attachment at the point at which you had sent it on. Is that right?
Yes.
That the email chain was not marked private and confidential.
Yes, that's correct.
And that you didn't pick up from the subject line, Future of Post Office Branches, what it was in fact about.
That's correct.
Did those things contribute to your inadvertence?
Yes, they did.
Later that day on the 18th, Messrs. Ismail and Jacobs emailed you expressing their concerns, they having learnt that you had provided the Project Pineapple note to the individuals named in the complaint. Can we look at that, please? Poll 00448383. Can we start, please, at page 2? Mr. Ismail's email to you later that day, it's 10 o'clock at night, copied to Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Staunton, writing, addressing a deeply concerning and distressing matter that's come to my attention. There was a confidential meeting between myself, Elliot, and the chairman where we discussed our observations and concerns regarding the operations of the post office and our ongoing cultural issues. Regrettably, it's come to my knowledge that the notes of the meeting, which were intended to be kept in strict confidence, have been circulated to the individuals who are the subject of our discussion. The implications of the breach of confidentiality are far-reaching and have placed me in an extremely compromising position. It's not only damaged the relationships between myself and these individuals, the head of legal and the head of postmasters, but will have eroded trust and will create an atmosphere of tension and hostility. I wonder about serious repercussions for me as a postmaster, as both these individuals are untouchable, as you have said. I'm deeply troubled by how this breach occurred, what measures were in place to prevent such a mishap from happening. Please see below my concerns that outline the gravity of the situation. I request that you thoroughly investigate how the breach of confidentiality occurred and address the following. Was the breach as a result of negligence or a lack of judgment on your part? How can a mistake of this magnitude happen within the organisation, especially when dealing with sensitive matters and with all the current spotlight on us? By exposing me to such a compromising and jeopardising position, how do you expect me to continue working effectively with the individuals involved? And then to page 1, please. Mr. Jacobs, still later on the same day, 11 o'clock at night, 2 minutes to midnight, I strongly echo SAF's views on this. He said in an email to you, the same distribution list. The release of the confidential briefing note to the very people we've highlighted in the document is an horrendous breach of trust. My only desire on this board as a postmaster, Ned, has been to ensure the organisation does the right thing. My actions have always sought to protect the organisation from both internal and external risks. Your description of these three men, JB, that's Mr. Bartlett,
yes,
is that right?
Yes.
Who was the then director, is director of investigations and assurance.
That's correct.
So the old investigations division.
The new investigations division. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Foat, General Counsel,
Yes.
and Martin Roberts, Chief Group Retail Officer, yes?
That's correct.
As untouchable in our call earlier today was worrying enough, especially in the light of our grave concerns as to their ability and the power they wield without any real oversight, but's made worse by them now being told of our view of them. Only one board meeting ago, these people came to the board to request authority to recommend police investigations into postmasters without board oversight or approval, and thought nothing of it. To be so staggeringly out of step with the reality of the world post office occupies today is beyond belief. You'll see that both emails refer to you referring to the three men, or some of them, in a call that day as untouchable. Did you do so?
My recollection of this is being very, very clear that no one in the business is untouchable. I don't know if I used the word untouchable, but no one is above the law, and that is really important. The point that I was making to them, and it wasn't specifically about Martin Roberts, Ben, or indeed JB, was that we are trying to bring a sense of transparency to the organisation, and nobody is above the law, and that is the point that I'm trying to make. The sort of secondary observation as a consequence of this is that my position in terms of formally addressing the investigations team at that current time was difficult. I was under investigation myself by the oversight was being provided by the investigations team. And the point that I was making was that until such time as that had concluded, it would be difficult for me to ensure that we were getting the right the right kind of oversight from Ben and JB in terms of the investigations that they were adopting.
To move the matter on, what then happened is this, right, is that Mr. Foat and Mr. Roberts, for their part, required written apologies to be provided by the two postmaster non-executive directors, Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Ismail.
Yes.
If we look at those, please. poll 0044 8577. This, at the top of the page, is Mr. Foat's email to Ms. McEwen and others, including you. And in his second paragraph, Mr. Foat says, as a minimum, Elliot Jacobs should go on record and in writing to confirm the apology he provided to me about the assertions that were made in the Pineapple file note. Comments attributed to him have been published in the media. He's remained silent when he's well aware those comments contain factual inaccuracies and even a basic lack of understanding of Post Office organisational structure. And so far as Mr. Roberts is concerned, poll 0044 8514. Page 2, please. And this is Mr. Roberts' email to Mr. Jacobs and Mr. Ismail. Third paragraph. I would now ask that you please put in writing the apology and retract all the allegations and statements presented in the email that I was copied in on. And then page 1, please. Joint reply, essentially, as promised, Saf and I sat down and talked with Martin after the board meeting yesterday. An honest and open discussion was had. We believe we put the matter to bed. This evening, we've received the email from below asking us to retract the statements made in the documents. He says, whilst we have both made clear the tone and the way it was delivered was unacceptable and should never have been circulated, the content is not something we feel is incorrect with regard to the retail team leadership and performance. Our position remains that these are both important and urgent issues that must be addressed, not ignored, regardless of how they have come in to his mailbox. Scroll down, please. Yes, we needn't look at the remainder. What discussions, if any, did you have with Mr. Roberts and Mr. Foat on Project Pineapple?
I spoke with both of them, and Martin Roberts in particular said that he felt he'd had a fulsome apology and conversation with Saf and Elliot, and this email would suggest slightly different, that they were obviously apologetic that Martin got to hear about the information in this particular way, but that actually they stood by what they said, and I think there was some disagreement, I think, well, misinterpretation perhaps is a better way to describe it. I think Martin felt that he had a fulsome apology from them, and so that was very unfortunate for sure.
What about the substance of the issues that these two sub-postmaster non-executive directors were raising? How was that addressed? Was it addressed?
Be more sort of specific, as in the 6 allegations that they have made. Well, you've heard me talk about the specifics around the investigation into past roles, and my memory's gone. Sorry. What was I going to say?
Do you want to look at the list?
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Would you scroll down, please?
Yeah, Phoenix. Sorry.
Yeah.
Absolutely. The issue around the replacement plan, we were very clear that the 2 postmasters, NEDs, were the first that had been on the board in the post office's history, and we wanted to work with them to ensure that really clear lessons were learnt, and I know that the retail team did that and subsequently did that. They took the postmaster NED comments about induction, about recruitment, about what the next phase should look like. But we had been clear that, and they were under no illusions, that the term was a single term in terms of their 3 years on the board, and that they would naturally roll off. I don't think we had been explicit about that, but I think that was the intent. So they had good input into that process. The stamps issue was well spotted by Elliot, and we jumped on that straight away. Within 24 hours, that process had ceased. So I'm comfortable that we took the right action on that. Martin Roberts was investigated and looked into, and there were no complaints that were upheld in that regard. I know, having spoken to Tracy Marshall and indeed to the Postmaster Engagement Director, who is a current serving postmaster, that they would absolutely refute that. They feel that they've had good engagement with the non-executive directors. And this notion of path clearing, and I think this has come up a number of times, Henry Staunton mentioned it, and I think it's important that we understand precisely what this is, because I don't think it's been well articulated. Path clearing is an event that is going to occur when the organisation rolls off the Horizon platform and moves on to the NBIT platform. What will be required to happen is that in all 11,500 branches, there will need to be a full cash and stock audit in order for the migration from one system to another. We have no real understanding about what the implications for that will be, and indeed whether or not there are going to be large surpluses or indeed large gaps in terms of the stock and the cash that is held in each individual branch. We really don't know that. We are flagging it as a challenge, and we will need to think very carefully when we get to that point in 2 years' time how we manage that particular problem. It's a known challenge, and I think the way it's been discussed in the board, in the inquiry, is that somehow we're going to address this in the next few months. It simply isn't the case. We've got lots of thinking to do around this. It's a known problem. So I hope I've tried to bring some colour to the in the issues here. This, is a very important and big deal. I am very sad that the situation occurred. I think the events that have subsequently happened have not been helpful either to the postmaster non-executive directors and or indeed to the members of the group executive who were quoted. And I think in terms of the confidence that it's given to the rest of the postmaster organisation about what goes on at the top of the organisation. And you can see that playing out in people's confidence in the colleague survey results for 24, which happened a few weeks after this event. So it's not a happy period in the Post Office's history, and I don't think it's something that anybody is particularly proud of amongst the leadership team.
Would you describe what we read as the normal operation of a board and general executive of a large corporation undertaking complex issues, or assigned to the outside world who have been given a glimpse into it of the dysfunctional operation of that company at board and general executive level?
I think all businesses, all complex businesses have spats and issues that emerge at group executive and board level, certainly in my experience. I think it's deeply unfortunate that this is a public spat, for want of a better word, and I think it's fairly unedifying for the Post Office, but I don't think it's necessarily reflective of anything more fundamental than that. I think it is something that happens in large, complex organisations.
So you're saying this is the kind of spat that goes on regularly at board and general executive level, the public just don't get to see it?
No, I don't think I said that. I think this is occurs. And as I say, in large organisations and complex organisations, people fall out, mistakes get made, issues emerge. I don't think I would necessarily say there's a corollary that this therefore means that it's utterly dysfunctional.
And so to try and pin you down more precisely, take out the word regularly, this is the kind of these are the kind of exchanges and these are the type of relationships that one could reasonably expect to see in a well-functioning organisation?
No, I don't think that's the case. I think the business was under enormous amounts of pressure. I think that that has been well articulated by many of my colleagues who've been at the inquiry over the last couple of weeks. I think when a business is experiencing the level of parliamentary, media and inquiry scrutiny that it is under at the moment, it isn't entirely surprising that issues that may be easily and more readily resolved suddenly take a life of their own. And I think that's certainly the case with this particular issue, and there are others as well.
Can we move forward with the issue of the Project Phoenix and Past Roles project?
Yes.
And the interaction between the two by looking in February 2024 at the minutes of a poll, SEG and General Executive Tactical Meeting, poll 00458674. Thank you. And can you just explain briefly what the SEG stroke GE tactical meeting is or was?
Yes, I can. Yes, every Wednesday we have a strategic executive group meeting. That is, the names of the individuals are, I think, those who are present. And you can see from the apologies who constitutes the strategic executive group. And just for sort of clarity, the group executive was replaced by this new group called the Strategic Executive Group in January 2024.
You're named amongst others as being present, and if we scroll down to item 4, please, which is over the page, I'm sorry. The Project Phoenix stroke past roles verbal update. Key points of note. Nicola Marriott, can you explain the function that Nicola Marriott performed at this time?
Yes, I can. She is the number 2 to Karen McEwen in the People Department.
Noted the distinction between Project Phoenix, where allegations of wrongdoing were concerned, and past roles review, where no such allegations were made. Firstly, is that a distinction that you recognise?
Yes, it is.
And where the review was focused on determining any conflicts or potential conflicts as between certain previous and current roles. So the latter, the past roles review, concerns a past role and a present role which presents a conflict or potential conflict even absent an allegation of wrongdoing.
That's correct.
Ms. Marriott noted the latest position in relation to past roles where 35 colleagues had been deemed to be read. Firstly, what is involved in being deemed to be read?
Right. I think that figure is now 27, but again, it's exactly as you depicted, which is, and I'll provide some context to the past roles work, which is effectively an assessment of the 1,700 individuals in our organisation who have been with the Post Office for 10 or more years. And this was the start of a desktop exercise to see if we could identify were there individuals who were involved in activities that were associated with this inquiry and with the scandal and found themselves in roles where they could be potentially conflicted because they would be involved in activities that were informed with redress or indeed with other postmasters themselves.
Just stopping there, can
yes.
you be more specific?
Yes, I
to
can.
The current role which gives rise to a potential or actual conflict?
Yes, we specifically prioritise the remediation unit and the inquiry teams simply because of the nature of the work that they were doing, which is obviously administering operationally redress and or supporting this inquiry in a specific way. So I asked for the work to for these 1,700 to focus most specifically on those individuals who are involved with redress or the inquiry, and then trying to identify whether there were individuals who might have in the past been involved in activity that is covered by this inquiry, investigations, audit, and work associated with prosecutions as well. And if there were, and there's no allegation at this stage that those individuals have done anything wrong, if they were, we wanted to make sure that we identified who they were and what roles they were doing today, and whether or not the roles that they were doing today in some way could be conflicted, or indeed could postmasters who are involved in redress or receiving redress be in some way intimidated or indeed affected by the fact that these individuals were administering the redress or indeed supporting the inquiry. That was the genesis of the work.
So why were these 35 individuals given a red rating?
Specifically, I can't go through all of them, but it would be, as I said, it would be those roles, presumably retail-facing roles historically, that they may have been involved in, and now they are involved in some form of activity associated with redress in the case of these individuals. Now,
so in the remediation unit?
In the remediation units.
The inquiry team?
None in the inquiry team, as I understand it, but these were specifically associated with the remediation unit, and those roles would have been shortfall analysis. They would not have been decision-making roles in the sense of deciding or determining what an offer may or may not be from a compensation perspective. However, we wanted to be really confident that anybody coming forward to the remediation unit had the confidence that they were talking and speaking with people that were unbiased in any shape or form. So it was for the individual's protection as well as specifically for the postmaster's protection.
It might be suggested that this work in February 2024 was a little after the horse had bolted.
Yes, it's slower than we would have wanted. And I think, as you'll see from the correspondence, and have indeed this inquiry has seen over the last couple of weeks, there's no question that this piece of work was slower. However, I can now confirm with some confidence that there should be no conflict arising from individuals working within the RU team when it comes to redress.
Are any of the 35 red-rated individuals the same 40-plus investigators that were mentioned in the Project Pineapple note? Are we referring to the same cohort?
Yes, I mean, I think we should be clear this cohort that's 40 untouchables or 40 investigators is not a cohort that I recognise, so I don't think the two are the same.
How many of the 35 red-rated individuals are currently within the assurance and complex investigations team?
I don't have the detail for that, but my understanding is the A and CI team, which constitutes about 17 individuals, is brand new. It was established in 2022. It was made up of individuals who've come into the organisation externally, and so there is no crossover, as I understand it.
The note continues, 4 red-rated colleagues were deemed to be high risk. Why was that?
They would have been individuals who would have been involved in audit or investigative work historically. Again, no, not necessarily an allegation of wrongdoing, but clearly from our perspective it was important that we identified who these individuals were and that they weren't involved in activity supporting redress.
So it was more to do with what they did previously rather than the function they were now performing that made them high risk?
Yes.
2 had been through the panel review with recommendations to redeploy. The other 2 will go to the panel soon, where recommendations for redeployment were also the expected outcome. You are recorded as asking how it was that the remediation unit had 35 red-rated colleagues. Not an unreasonable question. You were concerned.
Yes.
Why is our remediation unit staffed with 35
Correct.
people that occupied roles that brought them into conflict or potential conflict with the task that they were then undertaking?
That's exactly the question I was asking.
The answer from Miss Marriott was that resourcing decisions at the time had likely been based on a need for requisite knowledge. I.e., did you understand that to mean that we needed past investigators, contract managers and the like audit functionaries involved because the very complaints that were being made now concern the same activities?
Less so that. I think it was more the fact that the technical nature of shortfall analysis and disclosure these were individuals and experts who were better at doing it than anybody else, was the way that it was described to me.
She continued, the lens being applied now had not been envisaged, but arguably it should have been. This was just after Mr. Bates against the Post Office, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, it would have been, yes.
Did that affect the lens?
No, I don't think so. I think her point is well made. I mean, I think it was a concern that this hadn't been considered at the outset.
That said, she emphasised her earlier point, the individuals had not been implicated in any wrongdoing then or now. On Project Phoenix, there were 6 people against whom there had been specific allegations of wrongdoing. And over the page, Post Office had been engaging postmasters and legal representatives to determine the facts and the basis for any disciplinary or misconduct steps as proved necessary. Ms. Merritt noted the prospect that no findings of misconduct would be made, the difficult position this would present, where there were competing dependencies and interest, including the expectations and conviction of those who've made the allegations, the proceedings of this inquiry, and the individuals themselves who deserved fair treatment if they'd done nothing wrong. GE, is that the meeting?
GE is the group executive, yes.
Rather than a reference to an individual.
Correct.
Noted there were also wider historic, organisation and cultural issues being brought to the fore, which would likely be the subject of close external scrutiny. Another lens to be applied beyond any allegations of a historic nature should be how individuals presented themselves at the inquiry. There were noted difficulties and dependencies in this regard too. Agreed that the panel recommendations should go on to others to make final decisions on the outcome. What does the wider historic, organisational and cultural issues being brought to the fore mean?
Not sure I entirely know. No, I'm not sure specifically what that refers to.
In which case, Mr. Reid, that will be my final question before lunch.
And just so that I can be clear in my mind, the 6 people that are referred to on the previous page, you have told us are now 3 with no case to answer. And I think it was Miss McEwen, though it could have been Miss Carabarotti, told us that a decision about the other 3 is imminent.
That's correct, sir.
Fine, yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Can we say 2 o'clock, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.